In the previous video we've created this test, and I've mentioned that it wasn't a good idea to use parallel PHP here, because parallel PHP is a value from our local environment. And let's demonstrate why this isn't a good idea. So right now the test is passing, I'm getting green, but let's go to our admin and change the title of that post. So blog, let's edit this one, let's make this another value, let's save it, go back to the home page, we see there's another value here, and if I run the test again, it fails. We don't see parallel PHP anymore. In most cases, you want to use a different database when running tests. In most cases, you want to use a dedicated database for your testing environment. And luckily, Laravel makes this very easy. Let's first create a dump statement where we are going to take a look at how many blog posts there are in the database. So blog post, count. And let's run this test. And we're not testing anything, but I just want to get this value on the screen. So we have 15 blog posts now, and they are in my local database. But let's now switch to a testing database. You can do this by opening the PHP unit config. And here in the PHP section, we can set environment variables. Whenever a test starts, pest will call PHP unit, and PHP unit will put these values in the environment. Because these values are put in the environment, Laravel will use them too. So here you can see that we set the environment to testing, and we set a few other sane defaults. Now let's uncomment these lines, DB connection and DB database. So with this uncommented, we are going to use an SQLite database for our test, and it will be an in-memory database. So we're not going to use our local database anymore. Let's try running the test again to see how many blog posts we have. And we're getting another error. No such table blog posts. We are getting this error because we haven't configured our test suite yet to use a database. Let's do that now. We are going to go to the pest file, and we are going to use another one of Laravel's traits. And this one is called refreshes database. Like that. Let's import it. And this trait will run the migrations before each test is executed. So we'll have a clean, empty database whenever a test is run. Let's try checking how much blog posts there are in the database. And we don't get an error anymore, and we have 0 blog posts. So we're now using our in-memory SQLite database. Okay, let's go back to our tests. Let's remove this and run the test again. And of course, our test is failing because in our testing environment, we don't have any blog posts, so we don't see parallel PHP. Let's make this test pass again by creating a model ourselves. Because it wouldn't be very interesting to see me type up the entire model, I'm going to use a snippet. And here we have the code to create a model. And if I run the test again, it still fails because our homepage only shows published posts. And this is a draft post. Let's change this to published. And now our test is passing again. Nice. And of course, you could have multiple models here. So I'm going to change this to another one. And I'm going to assert that we see this as well. Another one. Let's run the test. And sure enough, we also see that title. Creating a model directly in your test works, but it can become cumbersome very fast. You always see all attributes and have to come up with values yourself. Instead of manually creating a blog post, you can make use of a nice feature, and that is factories. Using a factory, you can quickly create a new model with dummy values that you can use in your tests. Let's try that now. PHP artisan make factory and then the name of your factory. And usually it starts off with the name of your model and then a factory suffix. And factories are created by default in database factories. And here we have it. And you can see that this factory is being used to create models of this type of class. In definition, we should return the attributes the model should have. So I'm going to jump back to our test. I'm going to copy the attributes here. Let's paste this in. And instead of hard coding these values ourselves, we are going to use random dummy values. You can generate those random dummy values with Faker. So let's type this Faker. And on this property, we have a Faker instance. And we can say, hey, generate a random sentence for us. For an author, we want to have a random name. For the date, we want to have a value that's between now and 1 year ago. Faker datetime between -1 year. And I think the default of the second argument, which is the end date, is now. So I don't have to type it, but you could if you wanted to. But I'm going to omit that. For the body, I'm also going to use a sentence. And for the status, I'm not going to use the published status, but I'm going to randomly pick a status. This Faker random element of the array, blog post status, draft, and blog post status, published. I'm using enums here, but you could also use strings if you'd like that more. Okay, let's now use the factory in our test. So we're not going to create models manually anymore, but we are going to use the factory. On the model, you should call a method factory and then call create on it. And let's assign the returned value to a variable named blog post. And in blog post, there will live a model that is created using the definition that we just gave here. So with any luck, this test should pass. I'm going to remove this, blog post title, and let's run this test. And it fails. Can you see why it fails? Let's try running it again. It fails again. Let's do it again. Now it passes. Now it fails again. Let's try it a couple of more times. It fails. It passes. So this isn't really a reliable test. Why does it fail sometimes? Well, it fails because our homepage only shows the published post. In our factory, we sometimes return a draft post and sometimes we return a published post. If we want to let the factory return a blog post that is always published, we can do it like this. In the create method, we can add a couple of attributes ourselves. And these attributes will override the ones that were generated randomly in the factory. So I'm going to use status, blog post status published, like that. And let's import these things as well. And now we are going to hopefully see that the test always passes. And it passes, and it passes, and it passes. So this is good. Let's also make sure that a blog post that is in draft state is never seen on the homepage. We can do that by creating another blog post. We are going to make this one draft. And let's change this one to published blog post. And this one draft blog post. And I'm going to assert that I can see the published blog post title. And let's add another assertion here. Assert don't see draft blog post title. And sure enough, this test passes and it keeps passing. Now let's clean this up a little bit more. I can imagine that in future tests, we're often going to need posts that are in the published state or in a draft state. So for quick overrides, this is fine. But if you're going to do the same overrides a lot, you can define a state function to a factory. Let's show you how that works. Let's head back to the factory. And here I can create another function and I can name it however I want. I'm going to name it published. And here I'm going to return a function, this state, and I'm going to let it return the attributes and the values that I want to use if I want to have a blog post in this state. So here I'm going to mention the attribute name and I want to have the published state. And let's create the same one for draft. Draft, draft. And now let's use these state functions. I'm going to head back to our test. And instead of manually passing the attributes, you can call one of the state functions that we've just created. So published. And here I can remove this. And this can be draft. Like that. Let's run the test again. And sure enough, it passes. Now this test already tests a lot of things. We make sure that the home page is rendered, and we have made sure that only the published blog posts are seen. If you want that, you could split up this test in two. Let's do that now. So I'm going to copy this. I'm going to call this one, it will only show published blog posts. I can remove this from this test. I don't need to assert that I see my blog here because I'm only interested in the blog posts in this test. We don't need this import anymore. And yeah, I think this is a nice result. To make sure that everything works correctly, let's run the test again. And sure enough, we get green for both tests.